So picture this, right? It's the 8th century BCE,
Okay.
and there's this king from the really harsh, rocky deserts in the Middle Nile. And he looks north at the most famous, wealthy, and just historically entrenched superpower on Earth, which is Egypt, of course.
Right, the absolute giant of the ancient world,
Exactly. And he just decides, you know what? It's time to conquer them.
which is an incredibly bold move.
It is, and he doesn't just like launch a quick raid over the border. He mobilizes this massive river fleet. He systematically dismantles all the armies of these Egyptian warlords, and he claims the ultimate throne.
And the truly audacious part of this whole thing,
Yeah.
he actually told the Egyptians he was doing it to save their own souls. Like, he framed this massive military conquest as a divine rescue mission.
I mean, that is just wild. It's one of the most masterful geopolitical maneuvers in ancient history, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about the third intermediate period here.
Yeah.
That's a time when Egypt was, really fractured into all these rival factions up in the Delta.
Right.
And the king you're referring to, Pi, he didn't just rely on brute force. He capitalized on this deeply rooted ideological strategy that his predecessors had been basically building for generations.
Well, that strategy and the civilization that forged it is exactly what we are here to unpack today. So for you listening right now, if you're interested in analyzing how ancient states actually generated and sustained real power.
Or if you just want the granular mechanics of a massive historical event that usually just gets compressed into like a single paragraph in a textbook.
Exactly. This deep dive is for you. Our mission today is to uncover how the ancient Nubian Kingdom of Kush built a lasting, really powerful imperial state in a seemingly unforgiving landscape.
Right, and how they managed to absorb, manipulate, and eventually just totally dominate their legendary neighbor to the north.
So, to explore Kush, we really have to completely dismantle that lingering lazy assumption that early civilization only moved in one direction.
Yeah, that old myth that it only flowed from the Mediterranean down into Africa.
Right.
Because the historical reality is it's a much more complex, multi-directional exchange of power. Kush was not just some peripheral actor.
No, not at all.
It was a serious rival, a highly sophisticated trading empire, and really an imperial center in its own right.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because if we want to understand how Kush pulled off this level of dominance, we have to start with the literal ground they operated on.
Yes. Geography is destiny in the ancient world.
Exactly. Geography is the primary engine of ancient statecraft. So we are looking at the Middle Nile Valley. This is an area centered initially around Napata and later Meroe, which is in modern-day northern Sudan and southern Egypt.
And, we have to contrast this with Egypt, because Egyptian geography is really defined by its massive, predictable, wide floodplains.
Which makes farming relatively easy, right?
Very easy comparatively. But the Kushite stretch of the Nile was fundamentally different. They were working with incredibly narrow, thin ribbons of arable land.
Barely any farming space.
Right. And it's bordered almost immediately by just brutal desert margins. And crucially, they had the cataracts.
Okay, yeah, the cataracts. To me, looking at the sources, this sounds like playing a city builder video game on hard mode.
That is a great way to put it.
Right, because why would a major civilization root itself in a place where the river is rocky and farming is so scarce? It's like choosing to live in a fortified bunker instead of, I don't know, a luxury estate.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the interruption, that harshness, is exactly the point. The cataracts are the defining feature of Kushite geography.
Let's actually define those for the listener. What exactly is a cataract?
Right. So these are massive outcroppings of granite and syenite that basically cut directly across the riverbed. There are 6 major ones along the Nile.
And they just create these shallow, turbulent, rock-filled rapids, right?
Exactly. If you are navigating a ship down the Nile, a cataract is a hard stop. You cannot simply sail a massive fleet through them during most of the year.
Which presents this fascinating strategic problem. If you're trying to build an empire, relying on a river that actively prevents continuous transportation seems counterintuitive.
It does.
It's essentially a fortified choke point. Why build your capital in a region where your logistics were constantly interrupted by granite walls?
Because it functioned as an unparalleled civilizational shield. Think about it. A massive, centralized navy from Egypt could easily project power up a smooth river.
They'd just sail right up to your front door.
Precisely. But the cataracts forced any invading army to stop, to physically disembark and drag their boats. Or they had to march overland through incredibly hostile desert terrain.
Oh, wow. So they turned an obstacle into a defensive perimeter.
They absolutely did. The Kushites positioned themselves in a landscape that was just fertile enough to sustain their core population, but rugged enough to make external invasion an absolute logistical nightmare.
They have these narrow strips of floodplain, and then beyond that, the desert basically acts as an ocean of sand protecting their flanks. Early civilizations are really just a constant battle against chaos, aren't they?
They are. And Kush didn't just survive the geography, they built a repeatable order out of it. They capitalized on something called the Dongola Reach.
Which is a specific part of the river, right?
Yeah, it's a stretch between the third and fourth cataracts that provided a slightly wider agricultural basin. So they mastered a highly localized form of agriculture there.
But the broader geopolitical value of this terrain wasn't just defensive, was it?
No, not at all. The cataracts forced what we call a break in bulk transportation.
A break in bulk, meaning the goods had to physically come off the boats.
Yes. If a merchant from the deep African interior wanted to move luxury goods north to the Mediterranean, or if an Egyptian merchant was moving manufactured goods south, they hit the cataracts.
And they're stuck.
Right. The goods had to be offloaded, carried overland around the rapids, and then loaded onto totally new ships.
Which means Kush is operating as this massive, unavoidable toll bridge. They aren't just sitting by the river, they are actively controlling the physical bottlenecks of international trade.
Not just a toll bridge, but a clearinghouse.
Oh.
They controlled the flow, the taxation, and the storage of all these goods.
But you can't build a legendary empire just by hiding behind rocks and charging tolls, right? You need incredible wealth to fund an empire.
And that hybrid economy is the secret to their massive wealth. It's what I call a two-lane approach to statecraft.
Tell me more about that, the two-lane formula.
So they maintained a baseline of agriculture growing things like barley and emmer wheat.
Emmer wheat is the really tough one, right?
Yeah, it's a hardy, hulled wheat that requires intense labor to process, but it survives tough conditions.
Right.
And they supported that with cattle herding. That's lane one. It keeps everyone alive.
Okay, the farming is the baseline.
Right. But lane two is the trade. The capital required to build monuments and fund massive armies. They came from their absolute dominance of long-distance trade networks.
I like to compare Kush to the DJ, standing between two massive parties, basically controlling the O chord.
That is a great analogy.
Because on one side, you have the resource-rich interior of sub-Saharan Africa, and on the other side, you have the wealthy Mediterranean and Egyptian markets. And Kush is just sitting right in the middle, controlling the entire flow of the music, so to speak.
Exactly. They were humanity's earliest great state formulas. The river valley fed the kingdom, but the trade routes enriched it. It wasn't just about farming. It was about leveraging a strategic crossroads.
For you listening, think about modern businesses or even your own career. Relying solely on one skill, like the farming, keeps you alive. But positioning yourself as the bridge between two different networks, that trade aspect, that is what actually generates immense power and wealth.
It really is. And let's look at the inventory of that trade. They're moving raw materials that the ancient world was absolutely desperate for.
Oh, yeah. We are talking about gold, ivory, ebony, incense, exotic animal skins, hardwoods.
The gold is especially crucial.
All right, where is all this massive influx of gold actually coming from?
A primary source was the Wadi Alaki. This is a massive, dry riverbed system stretching from the Nile into the eastern desert. The Nubian desert regions were incredibly rich in quartz veins that just contained massive amounts of gold.
So they weren't just trading it, they were mining it too.
Oh, absolutely. The Kushites developed highly organized mining operations. They were extracting this gold, processing it, and funneling it straight through their cataract-protected clearinghouses.
So Kush is physically situated between the resource-heavy interior and the massive consumer markets up north. They have the defensive geography to protect their stockpiles and the logistical choke points to tax everything moving in either direction.
It's a perfect setup.
It is. But you know, wealth and trade routes can make you rich, but they don't necessarily make your people loyal to you. Just managing a toll bridge and amassing gold only creates wealth.
Right, it doesn't create unquestioned political authority.
Exactly. To hold an empire together, you need a story. You need meaning. You need what we could call the architecture of reality.
You need to convince your population, and your rivals, quite frankly, that your authority isn't just a matter of having more gold or a better defensive position. You have to establish sacred kingship.
And looking at the sources, Kushite kingship was deeply entwined with the divine, specifically centered around this one physical location, Dibble Barkal.
Gebel Barkal is fascinating. It's this towering, isolated mesa of sandstone that just rises abruptly out of the desert near the Fourth Cataract.
It just juts out of nowhere.
Exactly. And to the Kushites, and even to the Egyptians during their earlier occupations of the area, this mountain was not just a landmark. It was the Pure Mountain.
The Pure Mountain.
Yes, a primary dwelling place of the god Amun. And if you look at the pinnacle of Gebel Barkal, it features this massive natural spire that closely resembles a rearing cobra.
A uraeus,
Yes, the Uraeus. And it looks like it's wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt.
So the landscape itself literally looks like it is wearing the symbols of divine royalty.
It was a visual mandate from the earth itself. The Kushite kings utilized Gebel Barkal as the spiritual anchor of their legitimacy.
Now wait, they worshipped Amun, but they didn't just passively adopt the Egyptian version of the god, did they?
No, they worshipped a distinct ram-headed form of Amun that was native to Napata.
Here's a critical point we really need to dissect. We see them worshipping Amun alongside deities like Isis, Osiris, and Mut. An external observer might assume Kush is simply copying Egypt's homework, like they are just Egypt light.
Right, and I want to firmly push back on that. That is a very common misinterpretation. What Kush was executing was a highly sophisticated ideological synthesis.
They were remixing it.
Exactly. In the ancient world, power and religion were inextricably linked. Religion wasn't just a private weekend belief system. It was the architecture of reality.
So by adopting the iconography of Amun, what were they actually doing?
They were speaking the dominant political language of the Nile Valley. But they claimed that the Amun of Gebel Barkal was the original, purest form of the deity.
Oh, that's clever.
They weren't copying Egypt. They were claiming to be the true inheritors and protectors of a shared divine order. It's a classic ancient empire move, absorbing prestige from a neighbor and remixing it into your own legitimacy.
They took the prestige of the region's dominant religion and localized it to validate their own throne. And this wasn't just abstract theology either. We see this manifested in their physical architecture, specifically the royal burials at sites like El Kuru and Nuri.
Right, the pyramids.
They were building pyramids, but again, with distinct local modifications, right?
Yes. Kushite pyramids are much steeper than their Egyptian counterparts, and they're built over underground burial chambers, rather than housing the chambers within the superstructure itself.
That's a huge structural difference.
It is. Furthermore, they featured these attached offering chapels. These necropolises at Meroe and Napata were massive public statements. They explained exactly why the king ruled.
Because in the Kushite ideology, a king's power did not terminate at death.
Not at all. The dead required ongoing ritual care because the royal ancestors continued to advocate for the state in the divine realm. The elites believed their authority literally spanned across realms.
The pyramid is essentially a mechanism linking the earthly autonomy of the state with the cosmic order. It tells the population that their leaders are fundamentally different from ordinary humans.
It projects unshakable confidence.
Unshakable confidence. So we have the defensive geography, we have the staggering wealth from the trade clearinghouses, and we have this monumental religious legitimacy.
And that combination eventually leads Kush to look outward.
Exactly. Which creates a highly volatile situation for their neighbors to the north. Because by the 8th century BCE, Egypt is weak, fragmented, and vulnerable. And when Kush looked north, they saw an opportunity that would just change history.
This is when the underdog basically buys the league.
Yes. Let's get into the 25th dynasty. During this period, the third intermediate period, Egypt had basically lost its centralized authority, right?
Completely. The delta up north was ruled by all these competing Libyan chieftains and local dynasts. The great temples at Thebes in Upper Egypt were somewhat isolated from the political chaos of the north, but the country was deeply divided.
Kush had historically been controlled by Egypt, right? Like, for a long time, they were seen as the younger sibling providing gold and soldiers.
Yes, during the New Kingdom, Egypt totally dominated Nubia.
But now, Kush decides to completely flip the historical dynamic. They don't just secure their border, they initiate the conquest of Egypt and establish the 25th dynasty.
And the mechanics of how they achieved this are brilliant. It starts with King Kashta.
Right, the setup man. The sources present Kashta as this grand strategist laying the initial groundwork. He doesn't just launch a massive military invasion right out of the gate.
No, Kashta executed a bloodless political maneuver that secured southern Egypt entirely through institutional leverage.
He played political chess.
He really did. He traveled to Thebes, which was the religious capital of Upper Egypt, and he arranged for his daughter, Amenhotep I, to be adopted as the successor to the god's wife of Amun.
Now, we need to explain exactly how that title functions, because it sounds purely ceremonial to modern ears. But in the reality of ancient Thebes, what does the god's wife of Amun actually control?
It was an immensely powerful political and economic institution. The priesthood of Amun at Karnak controlled vast agricultural estates, granaries, fleets of trading ships, and massive treasuries.
So it wasn't just a spiritual role.
Not at all. The god's wife of Amun was the highest-ranking priestess, essentially functioning as the sovereign of Thebes on behalf of the god. By placing his daughter in line for this role, Kashta integrated Kushite royal blood directly into the economic and spiritual epicenter of Upper Egypt.
He effectively captured the treasury and the political apparatus of the south without besieging a single city. He's just quietly expanded his influence and rewired the institution from the inside.
It was a masterclass in soft power. It gave Kush a massive forward operating base and unquestioned legitimacy in the region.
Which sets the stage perfectly for his successor, King Pi. Pianki, as he's also known. Pi is the conqueror. He's the one who initiates the hard military conquest. But as we discussed at the very beginning, he frames the entire campaign as a moral crusade.
Yes. Pi's invasion, which he meticulously documented on his famous victory stela, was triggered by the expansion of a northern Egyptian warlord named Tefnut.
Tefnut was causing trouble in the delta?
Right, he was consolidating power up north and moving south, which directly threatened the Kushite sphere of influence down in Thebes.
And Pi didn't frame his response as an opportunistic land grab. He felt Egypt had become corrupt, right?
Exactly. He framed it as a holy war to protect Amun and restore MOAT.
MOAT being the cosmic principle of truth, balance, and order. Let's dig into the military realities of Pi's campaign. He moves his fleets down the river. He engages in naval battles. He besieges major cities, most notably Hermopolis,
which was held by a rival king named Nimlot.
Right. And the siege of Hermopolis is highly revealing of Pi's tactical and ideological approach.
It really is. He surrounded the city, cut off its supply lines, and just waited them out.
And when Nimlot finally surrendered, Pi's reaction, as he literally recorded on his stela, was not primarily about the political victory. He famously went straight to the city's stables.
Yes, and he was reportedly furious to find that the horses had been starved during the siege.
He actually reprimands the defeated king for neglecting the horses.
He declared that starving the horses was a worse offense against him than the actual rebellion itself.
I mean, that is wild, but it highlights some really important things, doesn't it?
It highlights two main things. First, the military importance of horses to the Kushite army. They were renowned charioteers and cavalrymen.
Right.
And second, it reinforced his ideological positioning as the protector of order. He was demonstrating that he was a civilized moral king, rectifying the barbarism of these fractured Egyptian lords.
It's like an underdog sports team not only winning the championship, but then buying the entire league and telling everyone they're running it better now. The victory stela of Pi has to be one of history's earliest "I told y'all I'm him" documents.
That's a hilarious way to put it, but it's very accurate.
So he subdues the north, extracts tribute from the warlords, establishes absolute dominance. He leaves his stela as this massive public record, carving his supremacy into stone. And then, remarkably, he just goes back south to Napata.
He had achieved his objective. He secured the northern border, neutralized the threat to Thebes, and established the 25th dynasty. He could rule his new, massive empire from his traditional capital.
But following Pi, this massive empire requires administration. It requires ideological maintenance. And this brings us to King Shabaka. Shabaka is the cultural preserver.
Right. Shabaka takes on a very different role. He actually moves the royal residence to Memphis, the ancient administrative capital of Egypt, and he deeply engages in the preservation of deep antiquity.
Because he understood that to rule Egypt effectively, they had to present themselves as the ultimate champions of Egyptian tradition. And the most famous example of this is the Shabaka stone.
Yes, the Shabaka stone is a phenomenal artifact.
What exactly is on it?
The stone contains a text known as the Memphite theology. The preamble of the text claims that Shabaka found an ancient, worm-eaten papyrus scroll in the Temple of Ptah in Memphis.
And because it was decaying, he stepped in.
Exactly. Shabarka ordered the sacred text to be painstakingly copied onto a slab of black basalt so it would survive for eternity.
What does the text actually say?
It's a profound theological treatise explaining how the god Ta created the universe through intellect and speech, like conceiving of creation in his heart and speaking it into existence with his tongue.
By physically carving this into basalt, Shabaka is positioning himself as the savior of their most profound intellectual heritage. He's basically telling the Egyptian priesthood, I'm not a foreign conqueror, I'm the only one keeping your ancient civilization from rotting away.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really explores the philosophical question raised in the sources. Were there heroes and villains here?
Yeah, how do we define a usurper versus a legitimate dynasty?
To Kush, Pe, and Shabaka were heroes and restorers. The Egyptian priests who collaborated with them likely saw them as powerful protectors. But to defeated Egyptians, or centuries later when native dynasties took back over, they were viewed as foreign invaders.
They tried to erase the 25th dynasty from the monuments later on, right?
They did. History isn't a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Power equals survival plus belief plus storytelling. And the label of hero or villain depends entirely on where you stand and who writes it down.
That is such a crucial point. But, ruling the known world puts a massive target on your back. And the Kushite era in Egypt was about to meet the most brutal force in the ancient world.
The final boss.
The final boss, exactly. Because while Kush was consolidating power, an unprecedented military machine was expanding across Mesopotamia. Enter the Assyrian Empire.
Under the Neo-Assyrian kings, they were a terrifying force.
We are moving into the reign of King Taharka now. Taharka is this massive empire builder, a huge temple constructor. And suddenly he is forced to confront what is arguably the most highly organized military force the ancient world had ever seen.
The clash between the Kushite 25th dynasty and Assyria was a collision of entirely different military doctrines.
How so? What made the Assyrians so different?
Well, the Assyrians possessed a highly professionalized standing army. They utilized advanced siege engines, complex logistical supply chains, and crucially, they had mastered the widespread use of iron weaponry and armor.
On a scale that the Kushites and Egyptians just hadn't matched yet.
Right.
So how does Taharka handle this? Because from what I read, he doesn't just wait for them to show up at the border.
No. Taharka engaged in forward defense. He actively fomented rebellion among the Levantine states. So in modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria.
He was stirring up trouble in the Bicker zone.
Exactly. He encouraged them to revolt against Assyrian tribute demands, and he promised Kushite Egyptian military backing. He actually sent an army to the Levant to confront the Assyrians at the Battle of Eltica in 701 BCE.
What were the tactical realities of a Kushite army at this time? When they marched out to meet them, what did they look like?
The Kushite military was heavily reliant on exceptional archers. Nubia was historically known as Taseti, which translates to the land of the bow.
Oh, that's incredibly cool.
They used composite bows that delivered incredible armor-piercing force. They also deployed highly trained chariot units and infantry armed with bronze and some iron weapons.
So at Eltica, they engaged the forces of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. What was the outcome?
It was somewhat inconclusive tactically, but strategically, it delayed an Assyrian invasion of Egypt for decades.
But the Assyrians eventually regroup. Decades later, under King Esarhaddon, the Assyrian war machine rolls directly toward the Egyptian border.
Yes. In 691 BCE, Esarhaddon launched a massive invasion, and despite fierce resistance by Taharka's forces, the Assyrian logistical superiority and siege tactics just overwhelmed the Egyptian defenses.
And they captured the capital city of Memphis.
They did. They captured members of Taharka's royal family and seized the treasury.
I mean, this is a catastrophic blow. Memphis falls. The Assyrians established local vassal rulers in the delta to govern on their behalf, and Taharka is forced to retreat south back to Nubia. So here's my question. If they got pushed out of Egypt, does that mean the Kushite Empire was a failure? Did the bubble just pop?
That is precisely where the old historical narrative fails us. It wasn't a failure. Taharka's retreat was a strategic recalibration, not a civilizational collapse.
Okay, unpack that for me.
This was a moment of profound civilizational resilience. Kush learned that the world was bigger than Egypt. Taharka is remembered as the player carrying the team while the scoreboard turns ugly. He fell back to the religious capital at Thebes and eventually further south.
Because they realized holding the delta against an empire that could just endlessly funnel iron-equipped legions from Mesopotamia was impossible.
It was a mathematical impossibility, so they engaged in a strategic withdrawal to preserve the core of the empire. Taharka survived. He continued to build monumental architecture in Nubia.
They lost the crown of Egypt, but they did not lose their kingdom.
Exactly. They maintained their independence. The Assyrians never successfully penetrated the deep Kushite heartland because those very same cataracts and desert margins we discussed earlier presented an impossible logistical barrier for their siege trains.
The civilizational shield held firm. The rocks and the sand saved them.
It did, and they eventually recentered their power at Meroe.
And to fully grasp the resilience of this state, I want to jump forward slightly to another massive geopolitical conflict, because the Assyrians weren't the only superpower the Kushites had to deal with. Centuries later, the Roman Empire takes control of Egypt.
Right, under Augustus in 30 BCE. And Rome sits right on the northern border of Kush.
And they meet Queen Amun. She is a Kandak. We absolutely need to define this title for the listener.
Yes, the title Kandak, which is often translated as Queen Mother, was a deeply institutionalized role in Kushite society.
It wasn't just, like, the wife of a king.
Not at all. The Kante possessed her own independent wealth, her own massive estates, and she played a crucial, ritually necessary role in the succession and legitimization of the monarch.
And in several instances, they ruled alone, right?
Yes, including Amun. She ruled as the sole sovereign. This proves that Kushite rulership traditions left far more space for high-ranking women than outsiders usually assume for ancient empires.
So Amun is ruling Kush, and the Romans start pushing south. They wanted to exploit the Nubian trade routes.
Naturally. And in 24 BCE, the Roman prefect of Egypt, Aelius Gallus, withdrew a significant portion of the Roman legions from Egypt to launch a campaign into Arabia.
Leaving Egypt vulnerable.
Exactly. Amun immediately recognized the tactical vulnerability. She didn't wait. She launched a massive preemptive strike northward.
The Kushite army basically raided the Roman Empire.
They captured several Roman frontier towns, including Syene, which is modern-day Aswan.
And there's this highly symbolic detail from the sources regarding statues of Augustus.
Oh, this is incredible. During the raid, the Kushites tore down bronze statues of the Emperor Augustus, and they took a spectacular bronze head of Augustus all the way back to Meroe, and they buried it beneath the steps of a temple dedicated to victory.
So every time a Kushite official walked into that temple, they were literally trampling the face of the Roman emperor into the dirt.
Yes, it is an unbelievable psychological statement.
Stepping into the arena with Rome and walking out fine is the ultimate proof of their swagger, but Rome obviously responds to this raid.
Of course, the new prefect, Petronius, marches south with a heavily armed legionary force. He drives the Kushites back and actually captures and sacks the Kushite city of Napata.
But once again, the geography dictates the war.
Right. The Romans quickly realized that marching an army deep into the Nubian desert to besiege Meroe was a suicide mission. Their supply lines would collapse.
The civilizational shield works again. The Roman legions hit the logistical wall of the cataracts.
Yes. Amun regrouped her forces and engaged in a grinding war of attrition. Eventually, both sides realized a decisive military victory was impossible. So Amun sent ambassadors to the island of Samos to negotiate directly with Augustus.
What were the terms of the treaty? Because usually when you negotiate with Rome after raiding their territory, you end up as a tributary state, or worse.
This is where Amun proves her brilliance. The Treaty of Samos was highly favorable to Kush. Augustus agreed to establish the permanent border at a place called Maharaka, leaving Kush entirely independent.
Wow.
He canceled all demands for tribute, and he ordered the Roman garrisons to withdraw from contested territories.
She fought the most devastating military force in human history to a total stalemate and secured her kingdom's sovereignty. That is just incredible. But, we've covered the grand strategy, the kings and queens, the geopolitics. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. How did the actual engine of this civilization function for the everyday people, the people who weren't signing treaties with Augustus? We need to shift focus to the people whose sweat actually built the empire.
Oh, absolutely. Away from the royal highlight reel, ordinary life revolved entirely around the Nile flood cycle and the demands of agriculture.
Because ancient civilization looks majestic from far away, but up close, it's mostly regular people just trying to keep their grain, their family, and their dignity intact. Nature was the real boss battle.
It was. For the vast majority, daily life involved immense physical labor just to produce baseline calories. They grew barley and emmer.
And as we said, emmer is tough to process.
Very. Its grains are enclosed in a tough husk that requires vigorous pounding in a mortar before it can be milled into flour. They lived in mud brick homes, herded cattle and goats, and really endured the stresses of nature.
And they interacted with the state primarily through taxation, right?
Taxes, labor demands, and distant temples. They relied on shaduf irrigation, which is a hand-operated lever system, to lift water from the river and later adopted the sequia.
The sakia is the animal-driven water wheel.
Right, which massively increased their agricultural yield during the Meroitic period.
So while the evidence leans heavily toward the elites because of the stone monuments, beneath that layer was a highly complex, fluid society. They existed at the intersection of Nilotic, Saharan, and Mediterranean cultures.
And this unique social fabric, blending ordinary Nile survival with remarkable social fluidity, birthed a deeply innovative culture.
Which brings us to civilizational technology, because they created a rich visual culture, Kerma pottery, monumental architecture, a hybrid art style. But when we think of technology, we usually think of gadgets, gears, aqueducts. What did Kush actually invent?
Well, this raises an important question. During the Meroitic phase, they developed two massive technological and cultural pillars. The first was metallurgical. Meroe has been referred to by some archaeologists as the Birmingham of Africa.
The Birmingham of Africa, due to its massive iron production capabilities, right?
Exactly. They utilized bloomery furnaces, they mined iron ore from the surrounding hills, combined it with charcoal inside a clay furnace, and used bellows to pump oxygen into the chamber.
Raising the temperature high enough to separate the iron from the slag.
Right. And the landscape around Meroe is still covered in massive mountains of iron slag today. It was centuries of intense industrial smelting.
And this iron provided them with superior agricultural tools and weaponry, which helped them hold the line against forces to the north. But there is a secondary innovation, one that is purely intellectual.
The Meroitic script.
Let's unpack this script. For centuries, they had used Egyptian hieroglyphs for their monuments. Why create a new script?
Egyptian hieroglyphs are a highly complex logographic system where symbols represent both sounds and entire concepts. By the 2nd century BCE, the Kushites developed their own indigenous African writing system to record their native language.
It's an alphasyllabary, right?
Yeah.
Consisting of 23 signs.
Yes, it had two forms, a hieroglyphic form used on monuments and a cursive form used for daily administration.
And the crazy thing is, we can read the phonetic values of the signs, meaning we can read the words out loud, but we don't fully understand the language itself.
Exactly. The grammar and vocabulary remain largely untranslated. It's one of the greatest mysteries in ancient linguistics.
Which shows that Kush's greatest invention was basically a civilizational technology. They invented a way to be African, Nile-based, imperial, and definitively not subordinate.
They took trade, religion, military force, and borrowed imagery and curated it into an entirely unique identity. They refused to be reduced to a single label or just remain a footnote in Egypt's shadow.
And for you listening, think about how Kush navigated their identity under pressure, moving between worlds, dealing with how they were seen externally versus their internal reality. It is a masterclass in adapting to your environment without losing your core self.
It truly is.
However, even the most adaptive, self-aware civilization is bound by the brutal realities of economics and nature. Kush didn't collapse from a single explosive event, did they?
No, it was a slow fade. The end of the Kingdom of Kush is a perfect case study in why empires really end. It's the slow, grinding accumulation of stacking pressures.
What were those pressures?
First, environmental stress. We just praised their massive iron industry at Meroe. But that industry was the catalyst for their ecological crisis.
Because you need fuel for the furnaces.
Right. A bloomery furnace requires unbelievable amounts of charcoal, and charcoal requires wood. They were harvesting massive forests of acacia trees in the surrounding region.
So they are clear-cutting the environment.
Over centuries, this massive deforestation destroyed the root systems that held the topsoil together. When the rare but heavy seasonal rains came, the topsoil just washed away.
The environment weakens.
Combine this with broader climate shifts that were gradually drying out the region, and the agricultural carrying capacity plummeted. They could no longer feed a centralized imperial population.
But even with a weakened environment, couldn't they just buy grain? They had the trade routes?
But they lost the trade routes. This is the second pressure, macroeconomic shifts. For over a millennium, the Nile was the primary highway. Kush controlled the toll bridges. But by the 1st and 2nd century CE, maritime technology improved dramatically.
New trade routes opened up, like the Red Sea.
Exactly. The Red Sea maritime routes completely bypassed the Nile. merchants realized it was faster, cheaper, and less subject to Kushite taxation to sail goods straight down the Red Sea to the port of Adulis in modern-day Eritrea.
The wealth that had flowed through Meroe just evaporated.
It did. The clearinghouses emptied out.
Kush didn't really fail, they just got outpaced. It's not, you weren't good enough, it's the game changed. Kush was the bridge, but someone built a new highway system, and this external pressure creates a vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum. Around 350 CE, a new power rose in the Ethiopian highlands, the Kingdom of Aksum.
And Aksum controlled the new Red Sea trade network, amassing immense wealth and power.
Yes. Under King Ezana of Aksum, their armies marched into the weakened territory of Kush. Ezana actually erected a stela, describing how he sacked the region and essentially delivered the final blow to the fragmented remnants of the state.
The ancient world formula for the end of an era. Environment weakens, economy shifts, new power rises. Kush faded because the world around it changed faster than its geography and systems could adapt.
It's the ultimate lesson in the impermanence of geographic leverage.
To bring this entire massive journey together, we started with a map of the ancient Nile that most of us assumed was cleanly divided, only to find it brilliantly complex.
Wow.
We saw how Kush mastered a harsh environment, weaponizing the rocky cataracts to create a civilizational shield.
We tracked how they built a clearinghouse economy, a two-lane system taxing the massive flow of gold and ivory.
We analyzed how they remixed a religion to legitimize kingship, conquering their biggest rival to found the 25th dynasty.
Fought off the ancient world's most brutal empires, from Assyria to Rome.
And maintained a layered, adaptable identity with ironworking and their own indigenous script. Kush reminds us that early human history was never just one script, one skin tone, or one center of power.
It demands that we view ancient statecraft as a deeply interconnected web of resource management, ideological framing, and environmental adaptation.
And I want to leave you, listening right now, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Kush's ultimate superpower was sitting quietly at the crossroads of ancient trade, acting as the invisible bridge between massive worlds. In our modern era, as we obsess over the traditional, highly visible global superpowers, what are the new trade routes?
The modern choke points.
Exactly. Whether it be data pipelines, artificial intelligence networks, or rare earth mineral supply chains, these are quietly elevating entirely new, unseen empires today. While everyone is watching the modern-day Egypt, who is the modern-day Kush currently holding the O-cord to our future, keep questioning the map and we will catch you on the next deep dive.